The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than the desert she once fought in. Every movement, every cough, every scrape of a chair echoed like gunfire through the halls of the United States Military Court at Fort Bragg. Rows of officers filled the benches, polished boots, sharp uniforms, and expressionless faces that had judgment behind discipline. And at the center of it all stood Sergeant Callan Hayes, a 34-year-old combat medic whose name once meant survival to her unit and disgrace to her superiors. Her wrists weren't bound, but her life was. She stood at attention, posture straight, eyes forward, while the prosecutor paced slowly before her like a wolf that had already tasted blood. "Sergeant Hayes," he began, his tone clipped and deliberate. "On June 14th, during Operation Sand Viper, you were ordered to evacuate with Alpha Unit immediately. Instead, you abandoned your position to tend to an unverified civilian casualty. Is that correct?" She didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." The prosecutor smiled thinly. "You disobeyed a direct order, Sergeant. That choice cost your team precious minutes, nearly cost them their lives." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cameras from military press crews blinked red, like distant sniper dots. Callan's voice was steady but low. "With respect, sir, my choice saved more lives than it risked." "Saved?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Do enlighten us how walking into a hot zone and dragging out a non-combatant achieved that." She hesitated, eyes flickering toward the gallery, rows of soldiers watching her with the same expression she'd seen 1,000 times in the field, a mix of curiosity and distance. None of them knew the truth. Not yet. Before she could answer, the gavel struck once. "Sergeant Hayes," said the presiding officer, Colonel Everett, a man whose career predated her birth. "You will answer the question directly." She inhaled slowly. "The civilian wasn't unverified, sir. He was a translator, the one who had led us through the minefields the night before." A whisper broke across the room. Everett leaned forward. "That man was listed as missing, presumed dead." "He wasn't dead," Callan said quietly. "He was under the rubble breathing. Barely." The prosecutor's expression hardened. "And you alone decided to disregard a superior's evacuation command to retrieve him?" Her gaze met his, clear, unshaken. "Yes, sir, because I heard him calling for help." Silence fell again. From the corner of the gallery, Captain Darius Cole, her former commanding officer, watched in rigid stillness. His jaw tightened with every word she spoke. To the world, he was a hero who'd led his team through one of the deadliest firefights of the decade. To her, he was the man whose voice had once barked through the calms, ordering her to leave the man and fall back. He was also the man she dragged, unconscious and bleeding, from the same ambush 20 minutes later. The irony wasn't lost on her. Colonel Everett shuffled a stack of papers. "Sergeant Hayes, your record reflects 6 years of distinguished service, 3 overseas deployments, and 11 confirmed battlefield saves. Why would a soldier with such a record risk everything for one civilian?" Her eyes softened for the first time. "Because, sir, sometimes one life carries more weight than a dozen missions." The colonel studied her in silence. Across the courtroom, the prosecutor began again, voice dripping with controlled disdain. "Sergeant Hayes, you've painted yourself as a savior, but your act of defiance resulted in a delayed extraction and a compromised comms relay. Are you aware that your commanding officer was wounded during that delay?" Callan's throat tightened. She could still smell the burning metal, the smoke, the screams over the headset. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I'm aware. Then you accept that your decision directly endangered your team." She looked up slowly, eyes hardening. "No, sir. I accept that my decision saved my team." A murmur rippled through the back rows again. Everett's gavel struck once. "Order." Flashback. Afghanistan, 1 year earlier. The heat was merciless that afternoon. Sand whipped against her face as mortars thundered across the ridge. They were halfway through a patrol near Helmand Province when the first explosion hit. "Contact front. Take cover." Cole's voice roared through the comms. Gunfire erupted like a storm. Callan dove behind an overturned Humvee, her medical pack already open. 2 men were down. Through the chaos, she heard it, a faint cry. not from her unit's frequency. It came from the ravine beyond the ridge. "Help! A.M. Amira. Please." Her translator. He had stayed behind to cover their withdrawal hours earlier. Command listed him MIA. But that voice, that trembling voice through smoke and fire, it was him. "Hey, stay put." Cole barked. "We're pulling out. That sector's collapsing." "Sir, I've got movement." "It's Tariq." "Negative. That's an order." But she was already moving. She sprinted through the hail of dust and debris, heart pounding like rotor blades. The world shrank to the sound of her own breathing and the beeping of her medic scanner. She found him under the concrete, bleeding, leg crushed, lips cracked from thirst. When she lifted him free, his first words were, "They planted more charges under your route." Her blood ran cold. That Med Alpha unit was heading into an ambush. She slammed her comm switch. "Command, this is Hayes. Secondary explosives planted near extraction route Bravo. Abort route." Static. Then, "Hayes, you're off comms. Return to your team immediately." But she didn't. She hoisted Tariq over her shoulder and ran. 10 minutes later, the ridge behind her exploded, exactly where the team was supposed to pass. She disobeyed an order, and in doing so, she'd saved everyone who was still breathing when the dust cleared. Back to courtroom. When the flashback faded from her mind, she realized the prosecutor had stopped speaking. Everyone was staring at her, waiting. "Sergeant Hayes," Colonel Everett said, voice softer now, "are you claiming your actions prevented further casualties?" "Yes, sir," she said simply. "And yet your superior officer's report indicates no mention of secondary charges." "Because," she said quietly, "he was unconscious when they went off." Gasps filled the room. Darius Cole's hand tightened on the railing, knuckles white. His eyes darted to the colonel's, then back to hers. Something shifted in the air, like the entire room realized they'd been told only half the story. Everett leaned forward. "Sergeant Hayes, are you aware that disclosing this information publicly could compromise classified mission details?" "Yes, sir. But I also know truth doesn't stop being true because it's inconvenient." The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then, with a voice that carried more respect than reprimand, he said, "Proceed." Callan reached into her uniform pocket, fingers brushing over something cold and worn smooth by years of sand and sweat. She placed the rusted dog tag on the table, the one she'd carried since that day. It wasn't hers. It wasn't her translator's. It was Darius Cole's. The courtroom froze. "Because," she said softly, eyes on the man who'd once doubted her, "I was the one who kept him alive long enough to save you all." The silence that followed was sacred. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The courtroom was still. Even the faint hum of the ceiling lights seemed to fade into silence. The dog tag on the table gleamed faintly under the overhead light, its engraved letters barely legible after years of combat wear. Cole Darius. O-Neg. U.S. Marines. Every man and woman in that room knew what that meant. No soldier parts with another's tag unless there's a story behind it, a story written in blood. Colonel Everett broke the silence first. "Sergeant Hayes, how did you come into possession of your commanding officer's identification tag?" Her voice was steady. "Sir, I retrieved it from the blast site. It was found next to his body before I pulled him out." A flicker of discomfort crossed Captain Cole's face. He looked away. The prosecutor, sensing the shift, leaned forward. "So, you're claiming you not only disobeyed orders, but also performed an unauthorized recovery of a commanding officer under active fire?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" The single word carried more judgment than curiosity. Her answer came without hesitation. "Because no one gets left behind, not even the ones who stop believing in you." A murmur ran through the back row. A few of the younger soldiers shifted uncomfortably. To them, she was becoming something else, something that didn't fit inside their rulebooks. Flashback, 2 hours before the blast. Smoke curled across the horizon like ink in water. The convoy had been ambushed, IEDs detonated in perfect sequence, cutting off both escape routes. Callan moved like instinct. Her hands were fast, precise. Tourniquets, morphine, stabilizers. She'd done this too many times before. Sergeant Hayes, report. Cole's voice came through the radio. 2 men critical, 1 Kia. Requesting evac. Negative. Evac bird can't land while hostiles are on the ridge. The ground shook again. Through the haze, Callan saw a shape fall, a silhouette tumbling from a command vehicle. Cole. Command down. Command down, she shouted, scrambling toward the flames. Her ears rang as another blast tore through the dirt. She crawled, body scraping against shrapnel and glass. When she reached him, his uniform was on fire. She rolled him over, doused the flames, and pressed her hands to the open wound in his side. Stay with me, Captain. He coughed, eyes clouded. You disobeyed my order. Yeah, she said, voice trembling. And I'll do it again if it means you live. His radio crackled with static. Hayes, fall back. But she didn't. She dragged him across the burning sand, every muscle screaming. She could feel the concussions ripple through the ground. One wrong step, and she'd vanish with him. By the time she got him behind cover, she could barely stand. Blood dripped from her own shoulder, but she kept pressure on his wound. Why, he gasped. Did you come back? She didn't look up. Because, sir, I wasn't trained to choose who deserves saving. Present courtroom. When the flash faded, Callan's voice trembled just slightly. Sir, when I pulled him out, the secondary detonation started. The translator had been right. If I'd followed orders, none of us would be standing here. Colonel Everett's expression shifted, somewhere between disbelief and dawning respect. And you have evidence to support that claim? Yes, sir. Her attorney handed her a sealed file, edges worn, stamped with the faded red words. Classified, level 9 clearance. The prosecutor frowned. Objection. Those files are restricted to Pentagon clearance only. But the colonel raised his hand. Objection overruled. Continue, Sergeant. Callan opened the folder slowly, revealing declassified images, grainy satellite captures, tactical maps, and a black-and-white photo of a compound labeled Operation Valiant Dusk. She laid it gently on the desk before her. Operation Sand Viper, she said quietly. Wasn't the mission we were told it was. The prosecutor froze mid-step. What do you mean? Her eyes lifted to the room. The extraction point we were assigned was inside a kill grid. It wasn't sabotage. It was designed that way. Gasps echoed. Colonel Everett's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting. I'm stating, she interrupted calmly, that our mission was a cover for a classified retrieval op, one involving an asset the Pentagon wanted deniable. The air shifted. The gallery erupted in whispers. The prosecutor's face paled. You have no authority to make such allegations. Authority? Callan asked quietly. You mean the same authority that erased half my mission logs, sir? Every camera turned to her. Every soldier leaned forward. At that moment, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man stepped in, gray uniform, for silver stars on his shoulder. The noise stopped instantly. General Marcus Halden, commander of Special Operations Command. The man whose signature appeared on every black operation in the last decade. He walked with the deliberate calm of someone used to silence rooms. When he reached the front, he saluted the bench. Permission to address the court, he said, voice deep and steady. Colonel Everett nodded. Granted. Halden turned to Callan. For a moment, his stern expression softened into something almost human. I thought I'd never see you again, he said quietly. The prosecutor blinked. Sir, do you know this soldier? Halden's eyes stayed fixed on Callan. She wasn't supposed to be here, he said slowly. Sergeant Hayes was listed MIA 2 years ago, under a different name. The room gasped. Callan stood motionless. Colonel Everett frowned. Explain yourself, General. Halden's gaze was heavy. She wasn't just a combat medic. She was part of Ghost Line 9, a covert unit buried under Medical Corps designations. Every mission she ran existed outside conventional command. Every kill zone she walked into, she wasn't supposed to walk out. The prosecutor's voice cracked. You mean she's a spook? Halden's tone hardened. She's the reason half of you made it home. Then he looked at Callan. You broke protocol, Sergeant, but you saved my men. And you exposed a network that's been burying their mistakes for years. She didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the general's uniform, on the silver star gleaming above his heart. For the first time, she looked tired. Not from battle, from carrying secrets too long. Colonel Everett leaned back. "This court will recess until further notice," he announced. "We will review this new evidence and testimony from General Halden." The gavel struck once. The courtroom erupted into murmurs and flashes of light from the press cameras, but Callan stood still, motionless amid chaos. Cole approached her slowly, his voice low. "You could have ruined me today," he said quietly. "Why didn't you?" She turned toward him, eyes hollow but kind. "Because, Captain, saving someone's life doesn't stop after the battlefield." He stared at her, the weight of unspoken guilt in his silence. As she turned to leave, the general stopped her. "Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, "there's a ceremony next week at Arlington. For those who didn't come back, you belong there." She looked at him with a faint, weary smile. "I've spent years walking among ghosts, sir. Maybe it's time I stopped pretending I'm not one of them." And with that, she walked past the rows of soldiers, past the stairs, the cameras, the judgment, and stepped into the sunlight outside. The world looked the same, but she knew nothing ever would be again. When the courtroom doors opened that afternoon, the world outside had already changed. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, microphones trembling in the wind. The story of Sergeant Ethan Cole, the Marine sniper who disobeyed a broken order to save innocent lives, was spreading like wildfire. The general's confession had cracked the silence that had buried him for years. By evening, the clip of the general's apology hit every news channel in America. On screens across the nation, people watched as a man once labeled a criminal was saluted by soldiers, veterans, and even the judge who had once doubted him. Inside a small diner in Kentucky, a group of old veterans gathered around a flickering TV. One of them, gray-bearded and missing a hand, set down his coffee cup and whispered, "That man did what we all prayed we could have done if we'd had the guts." In a classroom in North Carolina, a history teacher paused her lesson. She turned the projector toward her students and played the clip. When it ended, the class was silent. Then a boy in the back stood and saluted the screen. Others followed. And in a quiet hospital room, a young nurse named Lily, Ethan's sister, watched the footage through tears. For years, she'd believed her brother was lost to shame. Now, for the first time, she saw the truth. He wasn't disgraced. He was forgotten by those who should have remembered him. That night, the courthouse lawn overflowed with candles. Strangers came, lighting one after another beneath the flag that flew half-mast above the building. Someone pinned a note to the fence. "We failed our heroes. Never again." Inside the courthouse, Ethan sat alone in a quiet room, still wearing the orange jumpsuit. His shackles were gone, removed by the same bailiff who'd once arrested him. The general sat across from him, hat in his lap, eyes filled with both pride and guilt. "They're calling you a hero, son," the general said softly. "But I know you don't care for that word." Ethan shook his head, staring at the small window. "Heroes don't end up in courtrooms, sir. They end up buried with medals no one remembers." The general leaned forward. "Then let's make sure this time they remember." At dawn, the courthouse held a press briefing. The general stood before the microphones, his voice steady. "On behalf of the United States Armed Forces, we acknowledge the wrongful discharge and the injustice suffered by Sergeant Ethan Cole. Effective immediately, his service record is cleared, his rank restored, and he is to be honored with the Silver Star for extraordinary valor." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed like lightning. Ethan stood silently beside him, still in his plain clothes, unsure how to react. He looked overwhelmed, almost out of place in a world that was suddenly applauding him. The general raised his hand. "But more than medals," he continued, "we owe this man our apology. For every soldier who's been forgotten in silence, for every order that went unquestioned, for every man who carried a burden not his own." That evening, the White House flag was lowered to half-staff for 1 hour, not in mourning, but in honor. Across social media, the hashtag Salute Ethan Cole trended worldwide. Videos flooded the internet, veterans saluting from their porches, schoolchildren holding flags, families standing together in silence. In small-town churches, prayers were said for the men who lived with unseen scars. In Washington, lawmakers quietly drafted a bill to create a commission for wrongfully discharged veterans. And in the quiet of the night, Ethan returned to the place he hadn't visited in years, the memorial wall. Names carved in cold stone reflected in his eyes. He found one name in particular, James O'Malley, his spotter, his best friend, the man he couldn't save that night overseas. Ethan knelt down, touching the engraving gently. "They finally know, brother," he whispered. "We did the right thing." Behind him, footsteps approached. The general stood there again, not as a superior officer, but as a man who finally understood the cost of silence. He placed a folded flag beside the wall. "You did your duty, soldier. Now it's our turn." As the first light of dawn broke over the memorial, a soft wind carried the faint sound of distant salutes from across the nation. The war had ended long ago, but for the first time, so had the silence. And the man who once stood trial for defiance was now the face of dignity, conscience, and the courage to say no. Months had passed since the verdict that changed everything. The chaos of the headlines had faded, replaced by something quieter, something truer. On a golden summer morning, the old courthouse looked different. Where angry crowds once gathered with signs and shouting, there were now rows of small American flags planted neatly along the walkway. Children were helping their parents place them, giggling as the flags fluttered in the gentle breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh paint. The courtroom had been restored, not just as a place of judgment, but as a place of remembrance. At the front of the room, where the judge once sat, there now hung a bronze plaque, mounted under the United States flag. The engraving shimmered softly in the sunlight that poured through the tall windows. It read, "In honor of Sergeant Ethan Cole, soldier, protector, truth-teller, for choosing conscience over command, for reminding us that obedience without morality is not honor." The judge who once presided over his trial, Judge Mary Ann Porter, stood quietly before it, dressed not in her robe, but in a simple navy suit. Her eyes were moist as she adjusted the flowers beneath the plaque. When the doors opened behind her, everyone turned. Ethan entered slowly, walking with a cane now. His left shoulder still bore the scar of an old wound. He wasn't wearing medals or a uniform, just a plain shirt, jeans, and his old Marine cap, faded from years of sunlight. As he stepped forward, every veteran in the room rose instinctively to attention. It wasn't ceremony, it was respect. The general, now retired, was among them. He stood with his hand over his heart. The judge smiled softly. "You never asked for this, Sergeant, but it belongs to you." Ethan looked up at the plaque, silent for a long moment. His throat tightened. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out, his fingertips brushing the cool metal. "I didn't do it for medals," he murmured. "I just couldn't let them die like ghosts." The judge nodded. "And because you didn't, the whole country remembered what it means to serve with conscience." A photographer quietly took a picture as Ethan turned toward the crowd. The flash captured him standing beneath the flag, the bronze plaque glinting above his head. But outside, the ceremony was far from over. The crowd gathered in the courtyard, hundreds of people from every walk of life, veterans, families, students, even police officers. The air shimmered with sunlight, and in the distance, the faint rumble of helicopter blades grew louder. Heads turned upward. A Black Hawk helicopter appeared over the horizon, descending slowly in salute. Its rotors whipped the summer air, stirring flags and hats. The crowd instinctively raised their hands to their brows, saluting back. The chopper hovered for a moment, then tilted its nose forward, bowing, before lifting into the sky and vanishing beyond the courthouse dome. The general leaned toward Ethan. "They said they wanted to honor you their way," he said with a grin. Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I never thought I'd see a bird salute me." The general's smile faded into something heavier, something proud. "You earned it, son. You reminded us that the uniform isn't sacred. The man wearing it is." As the sun climbed higher, a familiar face rolled forward through the crowd. Thomas, the soldier who'd once testified for him. He was in his wheelchair, holding something wrapped in cloth. When he reached Ethan, he unfolded it carefully. a framed photograph of their fallen unit, smiling in the desert heat years ago. Ethan's eyes welled up. "Where'd you find this?" Thomas grinned. "Locker at the base. Thought you might want it back." Ethan took it gently, his fingers brushing the faces of the men who never made it home. "Every one of them deserved this day more than I did." Thomas looked up at him. "Then share it with them, brother. They're here too." The ceremony ended as the national anthem began to play softly over the courthouse speakers. People placed their hands over their hearts. Some cried. Some simply stood in silence, letting the wind carry the echoes of a story that had changed the meaning of duty itself. When the crowd dispersed, Ethan lingered behind. He walked slowly to the bronze plaque once more. The sunlight hit it perfectly now, and for a brief second, his reflection appeared beside the engraved words, older, wearier, but finally at peace. He whispered quietly, "I hope you're proud. James, we finally did it right." And then, he gave one final salute. The flag rippled overhead. The air was warm and alive with the sound of cicadas. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole smiled. Not the smile of victory, but the quiet smile of a man who'd found redemption. He turned, walked down the courthouse steps, and disappeared into the golden light, his story now a part of the nation's heartbeat. The plaque gleamed behind him, waiting for the next soul brave enough to do what was right, even when the world called it wrong.